Sometimes when you're mid-T-pull and your rotation isn't quite engaging enough, you really get to thinking. No, not about that. I'm actually thinking that damn, I'm really glad that this fight released in Shadowbringers instead of Heavensward. And you know why? The Epic of Alexander would suck if it released in Heavensward. And it's not because of the AoE indicators still being ugly as sin at the time, nor about the fact that instead of queuing into the duty, you'd instead need to enact a 10-minute roleplay with your entire raid group in order to even get into the zone to begin raid each session. It's actually because, and if you were around in Heavensward or around Reborn, you are going to grimace alongside with me in recognition. After each and every pull, you'd probably be waiting around 5 to 7 minutes before you can pull again. Why, you ask? Because when you wiped, your cooldowns did not automatically reset up until the release of patch 3.4. Instead, Square Enix would put your group collectively on the naughty step and make you sit there and think about what you've done wrong. Bearing in mind that Paladin's Hallowed Ground was a 7-minute cooldown, as if Heavensward players already didn't have enough reasons to want to shield lob that jobstone out the window. When I was progressing Alexander Midas Savage, my group at the time unironically had two different plans for mitigation and cooldowns. We had the good pull, and we had the oh god oh man, we don't have Hallowed Ground, so let's just spam Adloquium during the multi-hit tank buster and hope for the best pull. You can probably guess which pull had the best consistency. This resulted in you being really happy if you managed to hit a double-digit number of pulls in a single lockout whilst progressing if you were later in the fight. And in general, it was just a huge waste of time for everybody involved. Overall though, I think that one thing that can be universally agreed on is that it's an absolutely great thing that Square Enix removed the wait for your cooldowns from Final Fantasy XIV. It wasn't fun to deal with, it made certain jobs feel even more undesirable than they already were, and when cooldown reset was implemented, it felt like the virtual world of Eorzea could finally be seen in colour for the first time. And that's what this overly convoluted 2-minute long tangent was all leading up to. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the stuff that I'm happy got removed from Final Fantasy XIV, all the bad parts of the game that our forebearers had to deal with that have gladly been taken out back to look at the rabbits and given the Lenny treatment. Let's get into it. Before I look too far back, let's talk about something that I expect most of you remember. At the start of every Warrior of Light's day, they're gonna wake up at the Limsa Lominsa Inn after a long night of social interactions. Ready for the next day ahead? You put on your Type 2B boots proudly over your trousers, your gloves and shirt, your wizard hat, and just like that, you're ready to leave. But wait, there's a problem. It's so good you notice now before you left, because you definitely don't want the catgirls to notice you in your embarrassing moment. Your trousers are falling down, and no matter what you try, they just keep falling down. If only there was some convenient way to make them stay in place without needing to hold them. Alas, in Eorzea, it really is but a dream. Belts were removed from the loot tables and lists of equipable gear alongside the release of patch 6.0. Yeah, that's Endwalker's release. It was actually a really big shift for the game in a lot of departments, because it now meant that you needed one less piece of gear to contribute to your overall item level. There was one less drop diluting and complicating loot pools, and its removal meant more space in the armory chest could be made for other pieces. As a raider, this was absolutely fantastic because accessories were by far the most annoying pieces to obtain because there were just so many of them, and there was no guarantee of every piece dropping each week in the past. And for some reason, despite being a left side item, it was considered an accessory for most intents and purposes on drop tables. This just meant a harder time getting what you wanted. And if you really want a mold, remember that purchasing a belt cost you 6 weeks of Savage books. Whatever scam Rowena was running definitely needs to be brought into a court of law and given a very uncomfortable light shine on it. I, for one, prefer having to hold our trousers up manually than needing to deal with the evil that was belts in loot tables. The belts were something I think mostly everyone is aware of, and I think it's a nice little way to scratch the surface of this rabbit hole. But for the next thing I'm glad is gone from FF14 for good, we are going to look further back to a major annoyance that got its comeuppance with the release of Stormblood all the way back in 4.0. Before I tell you what it is, I'm gonna paint you a little picture. You log into the game, and your friend wants to run expert roulette with you. Great! You're both healer mains, so you swap to summoner to make your buddy's life a little bit easier. But before you can queue in, you need to teleport back to your home city, you need to go to your grand company, and you need to use your hard-earned GC seals to purchase a Keeper's Hymn. Then, you're going to use the Keeper's Hymn, and you're going to change all of your attribute points from mind to intelligence, manually. And now, you are ready to queue. After your roulette is done, raid is about to start, and because you are scholar for your static, you're obviously going to be swapping jobs back, right? That's all well and good, but hopefully you didn't teleport away from the Grand Company, because you need to go back and grab another Keeper's Hymn in order to swap your stats back from intelligence to mind. That's right, stats gained on level up used to be customizable. Essentially, you could pick your own stats to an extent, and they were linked to your class, not to your job, and the only way to change them was via a purchasable, single-use item. This came with, understandably, quite a few problems. Firstly, you'd occasionally run into Jimmy, the piety black mage main, who makes his own rules. But secondly, and more egregiously, if you played either Scholar or Summoner, which both derive from Arcanist, you were exclusively locked out of playing the other unless you purchased and used this consumable. And it was just such a headache to deal with all the time. You'd also often run into people who just didn't know that attribute points existed at all for some reason, so their characters were just categorically weaker than they should be for their level because they just hadn't assigned stats at all. Considering that Final Fantasy XIV has never really been a game with any real build crafting or customization, you pick a piety, you pick a skill speed or a spell speed, and otherwise you just stack crit. It was just a completely useless carryover feature that nobody could really make good use of. Instead, it was just a hurdle or an annoyance for people to jump over. Not fun at all, glad you're gone, and for every Scholar or Summoner main pre-Stormblood, please, contact Square Enix support for a refund on your Maker's Hymns. You deserve it. The next section is an excuse for me to begin what I hope becomes a habit in future Rinon videos in randomly inserting the crunchy rock cat with little to no valid reason. We are talking, of course, about materia. You're no doubt familiar with materia in Final Fantasy XIV, and I mean, if you're a player who has managed to reach endgame, I have absolutely no doubt that you've used it before to meld your gear, right? You definitely meld your gear, right?
Rin, I don't want to be a flamer, but where are your melds in your weapon? Jesus Christ!
What?
No
Oh, I've never used it!
Okay.
No way! I don't need.
There are all types of materia, blue and green materia that can buff the stats of crafting and gathering gear, giving you extra GP or more craftsmanship or control. For combat jobs there are materia for spell speed, critical hit, piety. Every substat you can think of is covered, and generally as a part of your BIS you will be following specific materia priorities to meet stack breakpoints. I expect a lot of you keep a stash of materia handy just because of how incredibly core they are to the endgame experience. But did you know that if enhancing your direct hit rate doesn't strike your fancy, you could instead meld for something much more useful in a high-end raid encounter back in the day, like poison resistance. How about slow resistance? In fact, instead of giving you examples, let's literally just go through the list. You could get hold of materia that would enhance your resistance to poison, slow, stun, heavy, blind, sleep, and bind. But on top of that, also for fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, and water. Why did these exist? Who used these? Nobody. And since patch 4.2, you can no longer equip them. so they've become somewhat of a collector's item. If you still have a first edition Wind Materia 4 in your possession, you should probably try and get it PSA rated or something, because it is going to be worth a lot of gil one day to some crazy collector. But that's not all, because main stat materia also used to exist up until the release of Shadowbringers with 5.0. Up until a point, tanks would take advantage of melding strength or later vitality to their right side accessories, which could accept that type of materia, and they would use it to massively boost their outgoing damage or survivability, to the point of using incorrect accessories in order to make use of the materia for the DPS spike. It was also seen as essential to meld vitality to your right side for the added HP for early raid progression, much to the chagrin of certain samurais. And if you didn't bring it along, you would usually be judged for griefing your peers, especially if you managed to die embarrassingly to incoming raid damage whilst doing so. Next thing is less of a game feature, but honestly more of a personal pet peeve. But this is my video, so I've decided I'm going to take my podium to whine for a minute straight about Protect and Stone Skin, and how anybody that misses them needs to reevaluate things in their life.
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
Stone Skin gave you a small additional shield that was generally something that was expected pre-pull, especially in raid, and initially you had to manually apply it to every single player individually. Late in A Realm Reborn, at least they added the ever so beautiful Stone Skin 2, which had a 6-year cast time and gave an AoE Stone Skin to the party, but it could only be used outside of combat. Protect was even more important, because it gave you a percentage defense and magic defense buff, and I think that most raids at the time were honestly tuned around players having Protect on, and because it was a buff, if you died you lost your Protect, and you had to have the healer manually reapply it to you. Very, very reminiscent of an angry parent wiping spilled food off their stupid child's chest.
I fucking hate you.
When both of these time-padding, annoyance-inducing abilities were removed, every duty was streamlined. No more awkward 30 seconds wait before prepping a savage pull. No more standing around like headless chickens waiting for the healer to protect you in your roulette, hoping to God he would just press the button so you could start. And 3 extra button spaces on my hotbar freed up for something useful. Now we have to open Pandora's box at last. We have to discuss the elephant in the room. You know the roll action system we have in the game right now. He's on the straight and narrow, finally, after a shady past. But it would be foolish of us to forget the lives he has ruined in the past, because he legally changed his name a little while back in the hopes that we would forget his sins. You might remember him by another name. You may recognize him as Cross-Class. Cross-Class was awful. With every individual class you leveled, a number of their skills that you would naturally unlock through progression would go into the cross-class menu, and certain other jobs could then select them as one of their 10 limited cross-class skills. Sounds like a pretty fun system on paper, right? A nice way to get additional actions that might be fun to use. Well, it wasn't. Swiftcast was a Thaumaturge or Black Mage ability, so in order to cross-class it as, say, a healer, so you can res, you needed to have a level 34 Black Mage to access it. You want to use that Nightmare Stone Skin that we discussed earlier? Well, they're the level White Mage to level 34. Don't worry, you get to double dip there at least, because Protect was locked behind White Mage cross-class as well. There were so many skills that were absolutely essential to gameplay in every aspect locked behind cross-class that the job system shifted from something you could optionally engage with to something that you would be hampering your ability to contribute if you don't use. Tanks were missing their ability to self-heal, as well as certain mitigation cooldowns without cross-class. I'm actually just remembering now as I type this that healers couldn't even DPS because Cleric Stance was cross-class, which is honestly just hilarious. DPS had it bad too, because in old Final Fantasy XIV, most DPS jobs had like 5 damage vamp buffs that they would furiously mash one after another in the ultimate weave that would implode the XIV analysis website upon impact before doing their rotation. And if you couldn't cross-class those buffs, You just couldn't do your opener properly. On the plus side, Paladin could cross-class raise, and there's something about watching him wiggle his sword back and forth for over 7 seconds straight to get the res out that really sparks joy in me. Good riddance, cross-class. The question I want to ask you today is simple. What would you love to see added to this catalogue? Which feature, function, or headache would you like to see removed from Final Fantasy XIV in Dawntrail? Let me know in the comments section. I'd absolutely love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day.